This section on characteristics is an attempt to look beyond the two-dimensional charts. If we look at my 2014 drawing, we can see exactly where the Admiralty had identified two fouls. A foul is the symbol for debris on the seabed. That's their location in 2014. The location is exactly the same in 2025, but now we can see the relative position for the channel. So this is a volatile area. Notice also that the Admiralty identified three wrecks exposed by the sands rolled back, and indeed we identified this wreck on the north side as the sands were exposed there. So this is not only a volatile area, but it has a bit of history. This is the Admiralty chart currently, and this shows exactly where the channel is. But we ask, just how was this created in the first place, and how is it retained? If we look in the 17th century chart, we could actually see that in fact the swatchway had been identified. How they identified and charted it is amazing, but it was obviously there. In 1938, again, that area was quite different. If we look in 2005, again, that was significantly different. This image was taken in 2023 on a lovely windless day, and we are headed west along the deep line of that swatchway. Note that on a windless day we have some very obvious physical indications that could ask some questions about what is happening. Here we're also heading west, but this time we are over the knoll, i.e. the drying area, courtesy of height of tide. And look, here this is no wind, absolutely calm, although the boat is rolling here because of the tide effect. And you can see just ahead on the starboard right hand side, you can see there's a tide rip along that edge. See how the boat rolls is purely caused by the tide agitating the surface and underneath of the water. We're coming along and we're probably right now at the edge of the knoll, coming into the deeper water, and where there is the tide upwelling right in front of us. Here a parallel run, going the other way, heading east, and we're going through the tide rip here, heading to going on top of the knoll. So note the boat action. All the waves here are caused by the tide. There's no wind whatsoever at all, as we will see a little bit later on. So this is all the upwelling of the tide colliding with the steep edge of the knoll. Bearing in mind this is an 8-ton boat, so this is played about by the tide. And we're coming now over the edge of the knoll and going on top of the knoll. There's still some tidal effect on there, but now you can see absolutely no wind. Why does this happen like this? This is now turning us to the 3D image visualised from straight ahead. The flood tide goes either side of the sands here, but we can see that some tide actually does come down through here, right the way through this swatchway. Note the shaping of the sands here, which is probably by this channel flood tide, and also you can see this little sort of shoulder. That is where the wreck at with 2.6 depth over here, so that is right in that position. Note there is a Venturi effect here, a channeling by the contours that starts to squeeze in here as we go through there. so that tide has to get right the way through that gap. So we get a natural Venturi effect accelerating the tide rate along here. The tide wants to go straight ahead, but it starts to collide with the Barrow Deep flood tide, the full weight of this major deep channel here. So this causes this to turn around. There's an inevitable squeeze between these two, and that actually causes a tide rip along this edge. So this tide has to force its way up as it goes around this knoll. So we can assume that this deeper part is simply because of that Venturi effect. Surprisingly, the ebb tide, which of course goes the other way, doesn't find any forcing through at this side. This is looking at the live 3D image now. Let's first fill in the water level. This is what we would see at low water springs or at chart datum. Just a little bit of sand exposed. We can remove the water level and see what is just underneath. Now note the Venturi effect there. The narrowing of the contours, which accelerates the tide through and scours out the deeper channel around here. Note this sort of channeling is caused by the flood tide coming down the main channel and colliding with this tide trying to come through. Note that shoulder, that is where the wreck was found by us a couple of years back. We can't actually see the wreck on this image, but that's the location. And indeed, the two fowls would be buried under this sand now. We can't actually identify where those three Admiralty identified wrecks are, but somewhere along here, they're there. Returning to the 2D image, this is very useful to users, but indeed we can now illustrate the 3D alongside that to give better visualization of what actually is going on down there. Now I don't want you to think that this is the only area we've ever done work. There's been many chartlets we've done over the years. Two creeks off the River Blackwater, which is off the Thames Estuary. On the south side of the Thames Estuary, Mersey Quarters off Mersey Island. Some work with the Harbour Master for Brightling Sea to show the creek depths. The Ray Sand, which used to be a channel that was always open, is now a half-tidal crossing point over the sands. A crossing point right in the middle of the Thames Estuary over what is known as the Little Sunk. One of the most shallow swatchways in the Thames Estuary, the Spitway. And finally, the knoll, and here how we can illustrate the 2D and the 3D together, hand in hand, to add better visualization to the users.